You ever have one of those days where you just want to relax, but the universe, or in my case, the HOA Karen, has other plans? Yeah, that was me last Saturday. I was just trying to enjoy a peaceful morning on my dock, coffee in hand, when the neighborhood's self-appointed queen decided it was time to stir up some drama. Little did she know, this was the day her reign would come to a crashing end. Let me set the stage. I live in a quiet lakeside community, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest excitement is usually a new bird at the feeder. My dock is my sanctuary. It's where I go to escape, to fish, to read, or just to watch the sunrise. I've owned my house and the dock that comes with it for over a decade. It's my happy place, but every paradise has its serpent, and ours is named Karen. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you know the type. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, always ready to pounce on the smallest infraction. She's the kind of person who measures your grass with a ruler and leaves passive-aggressive notes about your trash cans. And for some reason, she's always had it out for me. Karen isn't just any neighbor, she's the president of our HOA. She takes her job very seriously, patrolling the neighborhood like a mall cop with a badge. She's notorious for her strict interpretations of the rules, and she seems to get a special thrill from enforcing them. I've had my fair share of run-ins with her over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. Started innocently enough. I was sitting on my dock minding my own business when I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's golf cart approaching. You can always tell it's her because she's got this little bell she rings, like she's announcing her arrival. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever nonsense she was about to bring. "Good morning, Karen," I called out, trying to sound cheerful. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Do you have a permit for that dock?" she demanded, clipboard at the ready. I blinked. "A permit?" "Karen, I've had this dock for 10 years. It came with the house." She pursed her lips, scanning her papers. "Well, according to the new HOA guidelines, all docks must be registered and approved. Yours isn't on the list." Tried to keep my cool. "Karen, the dock is grandfathered in. It's been here longer than you have." She smirked. "Rules are rules. If it's not registered, it's not allowed. I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the dock immediately. Now, here's where the contrast really kicks in. I'm a pretty laid-back guy. I don't go looking for trouble. But Karen, she thrives on it. She lives for the power trip, the chance to flex her authority. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was targeting me. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I wasn't about to let her bully me off my own property. "Karen, with all due respect, you can't just evict me from my own dock. That's not how this works." She raised an eyebrow. "If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate this to the board. You could be fined, or worse." I could see a few neighbors peeking out from behind their curtains, watching the showdown. This wasn't just about a dock anymore. It was about standing up to a bully, about not letting someone push you around just because they have a little power. Stood my ground. "Do what you have to do, Karen, but I'm not leaving." She huffed, scribbled something on her clipboard and stormed off, muttering about rule breakers and setting an example. I watched her go, feeling a mix of anger and amusement. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. What I didn't know was just how far Karen was willing to go, or how spectacularly her plan would backfire, because within the hour the tables would turn in a way no one saw coming. And that's when I noticed something strange about Karen's boat, docked just a few slips down from mine. I couldn't help but notice Karen's boat bobbing gently in the water, just a few slips down from mine. It was a shiny, expensive-looking thing, one of those boats that screams, "Look at me." She'd only had it for a few months, but she made sure everyone knew it was hers. The HOA president's pride and joy. I'd heard her brag about it at the last community meeting, going on and on about how she got a great deal and how it was the crown jewel of the lake. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, trying to evict me from my own dock, while her own boat sat there, practically glowing with self-importance. I tried to shake off the encounter and get back to my morning, but the whole thing gnawed at me. I replayed the conversation in my head, each time getting a little more annoyed. Who did she think she was? I'd always tried to keep the peace, but this was too much. I decided to take a walk around the lake to clear my head. As I strolled past the other docks, I noticed a few neighbors giving me sympathetic looks. One even whispered, "Don't let her get to you." It was clear I wasn't the only one who'd been on the receiving end of Karen's power trips. By the time I made it back to my dock, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Karen push me around. I pulled out my phone and started looking up the HOA bylaws. If she wanted to play by the rules, then so would I. I scrolled through page after page, looking for anything about docks, permits, or grandfathered rights. And there it was, buried in the fine print. Any dock built before 2010 was exempt from the new registration requirements. Mine was built in 2008. I took a screenshot, feeling a surge of satisfaction. I couldn't wait to show Karen that she was, in fact, wrong. But as I was about to head back inside, I heard raised voices coming from Karen's dock. Curiosity got the better of me, so I wandered over, trying to look casual. Karen was arguing with a man I recognized as one of the lake's maintenance workers. He was holding a clipboard of his own, and from the look on his face, he wasn't impressed with whatever Karen was saying. "I told you the paperwork is missing," he said, exasperated. "You can't keep your boat here without the proper documentation." Karen's face turned red. "I am the HOA president. I make the rules around here." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. The marina has its own regulations. If you don't have the permit, the boat has to be moved." I almost laughed out loud. The universe really does have a sense of humor. Here was Karen, so obsessed with rules and regulations, getting caught in her own web. I watched as she frantically searched through her bag, pulling out papers and waving them around. But it was clear she didn't have what she needed. The maintenance worker shrugged. "I'll give you an hour to find the permit. If you can't, the boat gets impounded. Those are the rules," Karen sputtered, but he walked away, leaving her fuming on the dock. I couldn't resist. I strolled over, trying to hide my grin. "Everything." "Okay, Karen," I asked, feigning concern. She glared at me. "Mind your own business." I shrugged. "Just making sure you're following the rules. Wouldn't want anyone to get in trouble with the HOA." She shot me a look that could curdle milk. "This is different. My boat is subject to the same rules as everyone else," I finished for her. "Funny how that works." She turned away, muttering under her breath. I walked back to my dock, feeling a little lighter. For once, it seemed like karma was on my side, but I wasn't done yet. I printed out the screenshot of the bylaw and slipped it into an envelope. I wrote "for Karen" on the front in big, bold letters and left it on her porch. I figured she'd find it soon enough. The next hour was a blur of activity. Karen was running around making phone calls, digging through files, and generally causing a scene. The maintenance worker came back, checked his watch, and shook his head. "Time's up," he said. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of text messages and missed calls. Apparently, yesterday's drama had become the talk of the neighborhood. My friend Dave, who lived 2 houses down, sent me a screenshot of the local Facebook group. There it was, a blurry photo of Karen, arms crossed, glaring at the maintenance crew as they towed her boat away. The comments were pure gold. People were sharing their own Karen stories, and for once it seemed like the whole community was united against her. I couldn't help but laugh. It was almost therapeutic, seeing everyone come together over something that, just a day before, had felt so isolating. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on my dock, watching the water ripple in the early morning light. For the first time in a while, I felt at peace. But I knew Karen wouldn't let this go. She wasn't the type to admit defeat, especially not in front of an audience. Sure enough, around mid-morning, I heard the familiar jingle of her golf cart. She pulled up to my dock, her face set in a mask of forced calm. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tight. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the dock as if she might catch something from being too close to me. "I want to clear the air," she began, her tone clipped. "Yesterday was unfortunate, but I hope you understand. I was just doing my job." I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch. "Your job is to enforce the rules fairly, Karen, not to single people out." She bristled. "I don't single people out?" I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because it sure felt personal yesterday." She looked away, her jaw clenched. For a moment, I almost thought she might apologize. But then she straightened her shoulders and fixed me with that steely glare. "Look, I know we've had our differences, but the HOA is under a lot of pressure to keep things orderly. If we let one person slide, everyone will want exceptions." I set my mug down. "Karen, my dock is legal. I checked the bylaws. It's grandfathered in. You can't evict me, and you know it." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared out at the water, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed. "Maybe I was a little overzealous, but you have to admit, you're not exactly easy to deal with." I almost laughed. "I'm not easy to deal with? Karen, you're the one who shows up with a clipboard every time someone leaves their trash cans out for an extra hour." She actually smiled, just a little. "I suppose I do have a reputation." We sat in silence for a moment, the tension easing just a bit. I could tell she was struggling, caught between her need to be in control and the reality that she'd overstepped. "Look," I said, "I get that you want to keep the neighborhood nice, but there's a difference between enforcing the rules and making people miserable. Maybe if you listened to people instead of just lecturing them, things wouldn't get so heated." She didn't answer, but I could see the wheels turning. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to get it. After a few minutes, she stood up. "I'll talk to the board about your dock. You won't hear about it from me again." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "And for what it's worth, I hope I get my boat back soon." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But I knew she'd brought this on herself. After she left, I checked my phone again. More messages, more memes, more stories from neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Karen. It was like a dam had broken. People were finally speaking up. I realized that, in a weird way, Karen's meltdown had brought the community together. People who barely spoke to each other were now sharing laughs and swapping stories. It was the most connected I'd ever seen our little neighborhood. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk and see how everyone was doing. As I passed by different houses, people waved and called out to me. Some thanked me for standing, up to Karen. Others just wanted to know what would happen next. I felt a sense of camaraderie that had been missing for a long time. At the far end of the lake, I ran into the maintenance worker from the day before. He grinned when he saw me. "Heard you had quite the showdown with the HOA president." "Me see," chuckled. "You could say that." He shook his head. "She's been a pain for years. Maybe this will finally get her to back off." We chatted for a bit, and he told me that Karen had already called the marina office 3 times that morning, demanding her boat back. "She'll get it once she brings the right paperwork," he said with a shrug. "Rules are rules." As I made my way back home, I thought about everything that had happened. It was funny how quickly things could change. One minute, I was the target of Karen's wrath. The next, I was the neighborhood hero. But I knew this wasn't really about me or my dock. It was about standing up to bullies, about not letting someone else's need for control ruin your peace. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on my dock and watched the sky turn pink and gold. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just because I'd won, but because I'd done it the right way. I hadn't stooped to Karen's level. I'd stood my ground, used the rules to my advantage, and let karma do the rest. The next few days were surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in ages, I didn't have to look over my shoulder every time I took out the trash or mowed my lawn. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a collective weight had been lifted. People were friendlier, more open, and there was a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. It was as if Karen's public embarrassment had given everyone permission to relax a little, to stop worrying so much about every little rule. But, of course, peace in our neighborhood never lasted long. On the third day after the boat incident, I was out on my dock enjoying the morning sun when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see my neighbor, Linda, approaching with a big smile on her face. She handed me a plate of cookies, her way of saying thanks for standing up to Karen. "You're a hero around here," she said, laughing. "We should have a parade for you." I grinned, accepting the cookies. I don't know about a parade, but I'll never say no to cookies. Linda sat down beside me and we chatted for a while about everything that had happened. She told me stories about her own run-ins with Karen, how she'd once gotten a warning for having a garden gnome that was too whimsical, and how Karen had measured her mailbox to make sure it was regulation height. We laughed, and for the first time, I realized just how much Karen's reign of terror had affected everyone. As the day went on, more neighbors stopped by to say hello, to share their own stories, or just to thank me. It was like a block party without the planning. Even people I barely knew seemed eager to connect. It was a strange, wonderful feeling, but not everyone was happy. Late that afternoon, I saw Karen pacing up and down her driveway, phone pressed to her ear. She looked stressed, her usual air of superiority replaced by something more vulnerable. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Karen, looking more subdued than I'd ever seen her. She held out an envelope. "This is for you," she said quietly. I took it, surprised. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board, officially acknowledging that my dock was, in fact, grandfathered in and exempt from the new regulations. There was also a brief apology for any misunderstandings that had occurred. I looked up at Karen, who was shifting uncomfortably on my porch. "I wanted to give it to you myself," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You were right. I was wrong." I nodded, not wanting to rub it in. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry for how I handled things. I let it get personal, and that wasn't fair. For a moment, I saw a different side of her, a side that was just as human as the rest of us. Maybe she'd learned something from all this. Or maybe she was just tired of fighting. Either way, I accepted her apology." After she left, I sat down and read the letter again. It felt good to have it in writing, to know that I wouldn't have to deal with this nonsense anymore. But more than that, it felt good to know that I'd stood up for myself and for my neighbors. The next day, the maintenance crew returned Karen's boat. She was out there early, waiting anxiously as they tied it up at her dock. She didn't look at anyone, just kept her head down and focused on the task at hand. There was no grand announcement, no speech about rules or regulations. Just a quiet, humbled Karen, getting her boat back and slipping away as quickly as she could. Word spread. Quickly, of course. By lunchtime, everyone knew that Karen's boat was back and that she'd apologized to me. Some people were surprised, others just shrugged. "About time," one neighbor said. "Maybe now she'll leave the rest of us alone." As the days passed, things slowly returned to normal. Karen kept a lower profile and the HOA board seemed to ease up on the constant rule enforcement. People started planting flowers, putting up decorations, and generally enjoying their homes without fear of a citation. It was like the whole neighborhood had taken a deep breath and finally relaxed. One evening, as I was sitting on my dock watching the sunset, Dave came by with a couple of beers. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the peace. Finally, he raised his bottle in a toast. "To standing up to bullies," he said. I clinked my bottle against his. "And to karma. We laughed, and I realized how much had changed in just a few days. Not just for me, but for everyone. Karen's attempt to evict me had backfired spectacularly, and in the process, she'd managed to unite the neighborhood in a way that nothing else could have. As the sky darkened and the stars came out, I thought about everything that had happened. I hadn't set out to be a hero or to start a neighborhood revolution. I just wanted to enjoy my dock in peace, but sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you never could have imagined. A week went by, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The tension that had once hung over our little community seemed to have evaporated. People were friendlier, more willing to stop and chat, and there was a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. Even the kids seemed to play a little louder, their laughter echoing across the water without fear of being shushed for breaking some unwritten rule. It was as if everyone had collectively decided that life was too short to let one person's need for control ruin the fun. I found myself spending more time outside, enjoying the dock that had almost been taken from me. I started inviting neighbors over for coffee in the mornings and the occasional barbecue in the evenings. It was amazing how quickly people opened up once the threat of a citation was gone. We swapped stories, shared recipes, and even started planning a neighborhood potluck, something that hadn't happened in years. One afternoon, as I was grilling burgers for a few friends, I noticed Karen walking by. She looked different, quieter, more reserved. She gave a small wave, which I returned. There was no animosity, just a kind of mutual understanding. She'd lost her battle, but she hadn't lost her place in the community. If anything, she seemed relieved to have let go of the constant need to police everyone. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, Karen surprised everyone by showing up at the potluck. She brought a homemade pie and set it down on the table without a word. People glanced at each other, unsure of how to react, but then Linda broke the ice by complimenting the pie. Soon, everyone was chatting and laughing, and Karen even joined in a conversation about gardening tips. It was a small moment, but it felt huge. For the first time, she was just another neighbor, not the enforcer. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on how much things had changed. The dock, once a symbol of conflict, had become a gathering place. The neighborhood, once divided by petty rules and power struggles, was now united by shared experiences and a newfound sense of community. Even Karen, who had once seemed untouchable, was just a person trying to find her place. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA board. This time, it wasn't a warning or a citation. It was an invitation to join the board as a community representative. They wanted someone who could help bridge the gap between the rules and the people, someone who understood both sides. I was surprised, but also honored. After everything that had happened, it felt like a chance to make a real difference. I thought about it for a while before accepting. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would always be disagreements, always someone unhappy with a decision. But I also knew that change had to start somewhere. If I could help make the HOA more fair, more transparent, maybe we could avoid another Karen situation in the future. The first board meeting was a little awkward. Karen was there, of course, but she kept her comments brief and focused on the agenda. The other members seemed genuinely interested in hearing what I had to say. We talked about ways to make the rules clearer, how to handle complaints more compassionately, and how to encourage more community events. It was a start. After the meeting, Karen pulled me aside. "You'll do a good job," she said quietly. "Just don't let it go to your head." I smiled. "I'll try not to." Walking home that night, I felt a sense of accomplishment, not just because I'd won a battle over a dock, but because I'd helped change the way our neighborhood worked. It wasn't about power or control. It was about people, about finding a way to live together without driving each other crazy. Next weekend, I hosted another barbecue on my dock. This time, almost the whole neighborhood showed up. There were kids running around, adults laughing, and even Karen brought her famous potato salad. As the sun set and the fireflies came out, I realized that this was what community was supposed to feel like: messy, imperfect, but full of heart. Looking back, it was almost funny how a simple dock had sparked so much drama, and how quickly things had turned around once people started talking to each other instead of at each other. The dock was still mine, but it felt like it belonged to everyone now, a symbol of what we could accomplish when we stood up for ourselves and each other. Summer faded into fall, and life on the lake settled into a new, easy rhythm. The dock, once the center of so much drama, became a place of laughter, shared meals, and the occasional fishing contest. I found myself looking forward to the weekends, when neighbors would wander over with a drink or a story, and the air would fill with the sound of kids splashing in the water. Karen kept her promise. She stayed out of everyone's business, focusing instead on her garden and occasionally joining in on community events. She never quite lost her edge, but she seemed lighter, as if letting go of the need to control everything had given her a new lease on life. We weren't best friends, but we'd nod and smile and sometimes even share a joke about the good old days of HOA drama. Serving on the board turned out to be more rewarding than I expected. Sure, there were still disagreements and the occasional heated debate, but now people felt heard. We started a monthly newsletter, held regular potlucks, and even organized a lake cleanup day. The rules didn't disappear, but they became guidelines instead of weapons. The board became less about power and more about service. One evening, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, I sat on my dock with a mug of cider, watching the sun set over the water. Dave joined me, as he often did, and we sat in. Companionable silence, the kind that only comes from weathering a storm together. "You know," he said, breaking the quiet, "I never thought I'd see the day when Karen brought pie to a potluck." I laughed. "Or the day I'd be on the HOA board." He grinned. "Guess we're all full of surprises." As the last light faded and the stars blinked on, I thought about how much had changed, not just for me, but for everyone. Standing up, for myself, had started a ripple that brought the whole neighborhood together. We'd learned that rules matter, but people matter more. That sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to stand your ground, and sometimes the best way to heal a community is to share a meal and a laugh. The dock was still my sanctuary, but now it was something more, a symbol of what we could be when we looked out for each other. And as I sat there, surrounded by friends and the gentle sounds of the lake, I realized that sometimes the universe really does have a sense of humor and a way of bringing people together, even when it starts with a little drama and a whole lot of karma. And that, I decided, was the best ending I could have asked for.